here.
Mass killings and the inspirations behind The Conjuring, Amityville Horror, and the axe killings of Valisca, it's all here. So sit back, try to relax, and tune in because it's about to get pure evil up in here. Starting off our list today, we have the Lemp Mansion, and this house is legit the stuff of horror stories. The architecture of the mansion was pretty cool. It even had an underground cave the Lemp family used as a brewery. The Lemp family was composed of William, his daughter Elsa, and his 4 sons, Frederick, William Jr., Charles, and Edwin. In 1901, the first death in the house occurred. Frederick passed due to health complications. 3 years later, William Sr. took his own life when he realized he couldn't live with the grief. In 1902, Elsa was the 3rd to go. After her divorce, she followed in her father's footsteps and took her own life using a handheld weapon. Elsa's death was then followed up by the death of William Jr., whose passing mirrored that of his father and his sister. And finally, in 1949, Charles, William's 3rd son, killed their family dog and then himself, leaving Edwin Lamp to be the family's only survivor. When Edwin later died of natural causes, he had just one request: that every single Lemp family heirloom be destroyed. Since the death of the final Lemp, the mansion has been turned into a restaurant and inn, and it is said to be, understandably, extremely haunted. Several deceased members of the Lemp family are told to still inhabit the home, including William Jr.'s forgotten, rumored 5th son, who, story goes, was born with a defect, and so he spent his life locked in the attic until he died there, and so he began haunting it instead. Next on the list, we have the Rolling Hills Asylum. If you didn't think there would be at least a few of these on this list, I truly question your dedication to haunt culture. Anyways, the asylum was originally built as a charitable house for the poor, but it soon became home to unwed mothers, widows, orphans, the elderly, people with physical disabilities, and those suffering from mental illness, as well as the criminally insane. 17,000 deaths were reported on the property, and countless others occurred but were not reported, of course. The building was incredibly overcrowded, and patients were more often than not unable to receive adequate care while staying at Rolling Hills. Most of the time, nurses would be busy and unable to tend to the patients, but in some cases, well, one case in particular, that was probably best. Why? Well, because of one specific nurse, Nurse Emmy, who was known for her particularly cruel and gross mistreatment of the asylum's patients. Not only that, but it has been said that she was an avid participant in the dark arts, worshipping Satan and practicing satanic rituals on the grounds. Those who visit the asylum today are greeted by the unmarked graves of the many deceased patients, and they are also welcomed in by feelings of despair. It has often been reported that the maniacal laughter of Nurse Emmy can be heard throughout the building's haunted halls, and that the shadowy figures of patients past can be seen hiding around corners. I'm gonna go ahead and assume I know who they're hiding from. I mean, how crappy is that? You spent your entire life being tormented by some psycho nurse, and then you die just to spend your afterlife doing the same thing. Someone needs to call Emmy an exorcist so that those poor patients can finally be left alone. Next up, Smurl House, a house so haunted it garnered the attention of Ed and Lorraine Warren, infamous paranormal investigators. In 1974, the Smurl family purchased and moved into a home located on Chase Street in West Pittston, Pennsylvania. They stayed in the home for 13 years until in 1987 they finally decided they had had enough. During the course of the family's time spent in the house, they came to realize that the living were not the only ones calling the place home. Ghosts and demonic entities were said to have been sharing the place with the family as well. Janet Smurl, the mother of the household, claimed to have been violated in her sleep by one of the demonic forces, and the father, Jack Smurl, claimed to have also been violated while watching a baseball game on TV. The family also witnessed their dog being thrown violently against the wall inside of the home. So after all this, I guess they finally decided it might be time to call in the professionals, Ed and Lorraine Warren. The pair discovered that the house had been inhabited by, other than the Smurl family, not 1 or 2 or 3, but 4 ghosts: an old lady who was virtually harmless, a man who passed in the home, a violent young woman who had also passed on the property, and a demon who was taking control of the other 3 spirits. Well, I guess that is all the Smurl's family needed, because after hearing the news, they packed their bags and got the hell out of Dodge, vowing never to return to the home. Good choice, if you ask me. Next on the list we have the Perron House haunting, a haunting which was persistent and so terrifying that it actually inspired the 2013 horror film The Conjuring. In 1970, Roger and Carolyn Perron moved themselves and their 5 daughters into an old Rhode Island farmhouse. When they moved in, the previous owner left them with a warning: for the sake of your family, leave the lights on at night. I would have been out of there immediately. It didn't take long though for the Perron family to realize that something was seriously wrong with this house. Carolyn spotted the first apparition, the ghost of an old grey woman, Bathsheba, who warned the family of the home's dark secrets and told them that they needed to leave for their own safety. Again, how much warning do you need? Later, all 5 of the Perron's daughters began bonding with the spirit of a young man they called Manny, who was often seen watching them through the windows. Nameless ghosts who also inhabited the home would often rip sheets from bodies and bodies from beds, and often around 5:15 a.m. the house would be filled with the smell of rotting flesh. The family left the home, finally, but to this day remain incredibly disturbed about the incidents that occurred while they were living there. When interviewed, one of the daughters simply stated, "Let's just say there was a very bad male spirit in a home with 5 young women." Next up, at our halfway point today, we have Penhurst Asylum. The asylum was opened in 1908. It was designed as an institution for those living with intellectual disabilities, which, as we know, in 1908 included pissing off your husband, being left by your husband, not believing in God too much, smiling too much, or not smiling enough. When the asylum opened its doors, it quickly reached capacity, becoming home to 500 patients with both mental and physical disabilities. In 1957, that number jumped by 3,000, making the institution incredibly overcrowded and vastly diminishing the quality of care given to individual patients at the asylum. In fact, things became so bad and staff got so overwhelmed that patients were often kept in cages and chained to walls, and those who weren't would roam the halls half-clothed, walking in and out of overcrowded rooms while their cries, yells, and screams echoed through the halls. And patients deemed too problematic to benefit from the institution's so-called care were just killed. In 1974, the institution was hit with a lawsuit on behalf of a young woman who had suffered various unexplained injuries while under the center's care. It was found that the asylum had been in direct violation of their patients' constitutional rights, and so in 1987 it was shut down. Today it has been reopened as a haunted house, which is quite fitting, seeing as many of those who suffered torment and death on the grounds of the asylum are said to have never actually left. Next on the list, Sprague Mansion. Lots of asylums and mansions. I'm seeing a bit of a pattern here. In 1843, Amasa Sprague was killed while exiting his mansion on New Year's Eve. He was discovered the next morning face down, severely beaten. Along with that, he had endured a projectile to the wrist and a dog bite to the arm. His brother was charged for killing him and sentenced to death for his crimes, only to be proved innocent 7 years after his final breath at the gallows. Years later, Willie Sprague, grandson to Amasa, took his life in the mansion, blaming his father, Amasa's son, for his many failures. So as we can see, there are many candidates for apparitions that haunt the halls of the mansions, but funnily enough, the most well-known spirit to haunt Sprague Mansion isn't actually a Sprague, but it was a butler to a wealthy family who moved into the estate after the Sprague's departure in the late 1990s. The man had wanted his daughter to marry the son of his boss so that he may inherit the wealth of the family. Well, that never happened, but the ghost of the man insists that the estate is his regardless, and he has often been reported throwing blankets off of beds, touching visitors to the mansion, appearing as a misty white film which sends chills down the spine of those it passes through, and moving around the painted on eyes of porcelain dolls. It's really hard to get painted eyes to move. So moving on, we've got 112 Ocean Drive, the real haunted house that inspired the 2005 horror movie Amityville horror. In 1974, the home located in Amityville, Long Island, became the scene of an incredibly gruesome mass killing. Robert J. Defoe Jr. killed his entire family in their sleep. One by one, he entered the rooms of his parents and then all 4 of his siblings and ended their lives by firing projectiles from a handheld weapon. Ronald was given 6 life sentences for his crimes, and he spent an impressive 47 years behind bars before he died. After the killings took place, the house sat on the market for a while until it was eventually sold to the Lutz family at an incredibly discounted price. First, red flag, if you ask me. They lasted 28 days in the home before they fled. During their time, George Lutz, the family's stepfather, who had a history of exploring occult practices, would wake up every morning at 3:15 a.m., the exact time Ronald carried out the killings. The family also reported strange smells, seeing green slime oozing out of the walls and keyholes and cold spots. They often also heard the sounds of garage doors opening and closing. They saw kitchen blades getting knocked off the shelves by unseen spirits, and they also saw a pig-like creature with bright red eyes staring at George and his son Daniel through the windows. Not only that, but on many occasions, the family members witnessed each other levitating above their beds. They decided enough was enough and called in a priest. While in the home, the priest heard a voice screaming, "Get out!" He instructed the family not to enter the room in which the voice had originated, but the family did him one better. They decided to get out of the home altogether. I really can't blame them. I don't understand why they did it sooner. I don't understand why they bought it in the first place, to be honest. Next up, we have Waverly Hills Sanitorium, a massive hospital used to care for patients suffering from tuberculosis in the early 1900s, and the death place of at least 63,000 patients. No wonder some people have referred to this place as the holy grail of haunted houses. At its peak, the sanatorium was vastly overcrowded, housing 400 patients in wards designed for a maximum of 40. It was impossible to get good care with those numbers, and so, as you can imagine, most patients weren't actually cared for at all. And they were dying quicker than the hospital staff could deal with them, which of course led to the innovation of what some historians refer to as the body chute, an underground tunnel that was used to remove dead bodies from the institution and keep them out of view from the living patients. While the entire hospital is said to be haunted, it makes sense that the most spiritual activity tends to happen in the place where bodies were piled up like hay bales and left to rot. In fact, the area is considered to be so haunted that it was featured in 2 separate episodes of Ghost Hunters, and hundreds of people who have visited have reported sightings in the building, as well as reported hearing strange noises coming from the walls. Next on our list today, we have the Valisca Axe House, home to the Valisca Axe killings and the inspiration behind the 2016 horror film, The Axe Killings of Valisca. In 1912, Josiah and Sarah Moore, along with 2 house guests, their 3 sons, and 1 daughter, stepped out of their family home to attend a service at their church. After the service, they returned home. It was then that they entered their house for the very last time. At some point between the group of 8 stepping through the front door that evening and the neighbors checking on them the next morning, all individuals staying at the Valisca home were killed, brutally, with an axe. They were found dead in their beds, covered in slash marks and deep wounds. Many people were tried for the crime, but ultimately no one was convicted, and the killer's identity to this day has yet to be determined. The house sat empty for a long time, the neighborhood plagued with the tragic loss of 8 of its well-respected members. But eventually the property was turned into a tourist attraction, open for tours. Those who enter the house are greeted by the mournful whispers of the past victims, who can sometimes be seen in the shadow of the home as well. Okay, you guys, I want to know if you have been to any of the places on this list or anywhere like them. If you have, let me know in the comments, and I will be sure to shout out one of you guys in a video going up later this week. As always, I've been your host, Hannah Thompson, and I will see you in the next one.